Hello and welcome to Dingoes Ate My Podcast. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and this week we'll be discussing the episode Supersymmetry. This episode originally aired November 3rd, 2002, attracting approximately 3.64 million viewers, which is about half a million less than last week.
The
Alrighty,
scientific name scared them.
probably. So, number one movie in America this week. Any guesses?
Uh, this one.
It's
And
relatively,
just
it's relatively seasonally appropriate. Like, kinda.
Mhm.
It's about a month early, I would say.
Oh, okay. Because the one particular thing that always kind of rumbles around in my mind, because I think you verified it with me, was one of the Harry Potter movies. Because at the start of the year, ooh, that came out and it was a thing. But I'm not sure if it was quite yet or if it's until December. But again, if you're mentioning it's a bit more seasonal, which, as it is nowadays, is coming so flipping close, um, think of the Christmas movie around that time. The only one I can immediately think of, if I got the title right, is Christmas with the Cranks. But I think that might have been a couple years later.
No, I want to say that's like 2008 ish. The movie you're
Mm.
looking for is The Santa Claus 2.
That makes sense. Dear God, the Santa Claus movies. Which, on the one hand, growing up with and having was kind of like, it's a thing, it's all right, and the child mind accepts it. But then as it went on, oh, sweetie, it went on, and it's still going.
Christmas with the Cranks, just for the. Oh, you're actually not far off. It's 2004.
Oh, okay. Sooner than I thought, but still.
Moving right along, we'll go into music. So, number one song in America this week.
There's nothing immediately coming to mind, so I'll just go with the safe bet of what was on last week.
It's not actually. Uh,
Supposed yay, because I can't remember the one from last week.
so last week was Dilemma by Nelly featuring Kelly Rowland. Now, this song, I'll give you. This will kind of give away what the number one movie is next week. But what are you gonna do? It's this little song called "Lose Yourself" by Eminem.
Okay. Not exactly ringing a bell in the mind. I wouldn't be surprised because it is Eminem.
It's Dave. Dave, you know that Eminem song? You know that's "Lose
Possibly.
Yourself." That's "Lose Yourself." I'm pretty sure it's the only song you know.
Possibly. There's one or two of them. It kind of mixes and switches an occasion.
Alrighty. Well, let us move on to video games. And oh my god, I know I say this every week, but it's like, god damn, this was a good week.
I think it pretty much transcends into this is one of the years of amazing video game franchises.
You have no idea. Let's get into it. Okay.
Duly noted.
November 3rd, the day this episode came out, if you had a Game Boy Advance, you could pick up Contra Advance, the Alien Wars XE, or EX, sorry. Which is just basically a port of Contra 3.
It's a Contra game. It's Contra.
Yes, but not like crappy Contra that came out later.
Yeah.
On the same day, if you had a PS2 or a GameCube, you could pick up a little game called Spyro Enter the Dragonfly.
Yes. Yes. So
Um,
sad.
Unfortunately, this is not one of the good Spyro games, but that's.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, they're going to make up for it on November 4th.
Hmm.
Okay, we might be on November 4th for a while. November 4th, if you had an Xbox, they released this little game called Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance.
Yes. Damn it, this is one of the ones I don't know.
What are you not familiar with?
Um, because again, I know of it, but I don't know much about it. It's one of the ones that I don't know too much.
So it's basically the PS2 version. Like Substance is basically the PS2 version of Sons of Liberty. It's just a little bit expanded.
Okay. It's probably the case of I've actually seen the gameplay, but it's the case of it's Metal Gear Solid 2. And it's like, oh, okay, immediately to that instead of the case of it's the updated version.
Yeah, it's basically Sons of Liberty, the Game of the Year edition. It's like they added a little bit of stuff and put it on the Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you had an Xbox on November 4th, and for some reason you weren't playing Metal Gear Solid 2, you could pick up a little game called Phantom Crash, which I was not familiar with, but is like a mech game, kind of.
Oh, okay, that's understandable.
Also, on November 4th, if you had a PS2, uh, you didn't have to worry about Xbox getting Metal Gear Solid 2, because you were getting something pretty incredible that day, too. You're getting this little game called Ratchet and Clank.
Ooh. Ooh.
And we're not done. November
I would not
4th,
be surprised.
also. Sorry?
I would not be surprised.
November 4th, also on the PS2, you could pick up Robot Alchemic, Alchemic Drive, which certainly looks like a game.
I
Uh,
wouldn't be surprised.
it's kind of like another mech game kind of thing, sort of, kind of.
Yeah, again, understandable.
Also on November 4th, if you were a Game Boy Advance player, you could pick up a little game called The Fairly Odd Parents Enter the Cleft, which I'm not familiar with.
It was a thing.
Yeah, I never watched Fairly Odd Parents.
Again, it was a thing. It's not a thing now, but it was a thing.
It certainly was. The next day, on November 5th, if you had. I'm going to take a breath here. Gaming PC, PS1, PS2, Xbox, GameCube, Game Boy Color, and or a Game Boy Advance, you could pick up a little game called Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
Because of course.
It was on everything.
Because of course.
Here's a fun thing. I've never played a Harry Potter video game.
Which is possibly for the best. Though, if it was going to be one, it would be the Quidditch one, because it would be the only one that makes sense to you.
I actually okay. Here's a fun story. I actually owned that game. I've just never played it.
Well, we're going to have to remedy that at some point.
We are. We should do that. That might be our Christmas video.
Yes, wonderful, cozy time of the year with snow, hot cocoa, and random people getting the shit kicked out of them on broomsticks.
I've also never seen a Harry Potter movie, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving along. Also on November 5th, if you weren't a Harry Potter fan like me, and you had a PS2, you could pick up NHL Face Off 2003.
Yay.
It looks like it's a hockey game on the PS2. Okay.
Again, yay.
Also on November 5th, if you had a gaming PC, PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, or Game Boy Advance, you could pick up Zapper 1 Wicked Cricket.
Yes.
Do you actually know this game?
Only vaguely. Kind of the case of I've always seen it on store shelves, but also with little bits of history stuff that I've learned. It's technically the evolution and repurposing of Frogger games.
Yeah. It didn't score terribly well in reviews, but okay. I mean, I don't know why you would be. Okay, whatever. I don't get it. Okay, on November 6th, if you had a gaming PC, I can always guarantee you're going to pick this up because they released this little thing called the Elder Scrolls 3 Tribunal, which was an expansion pack for Morrowind.
Because of course it is.
Yes. The Elder Scrolls games are good. Anyway,
Indeed.
moving along to November 7th, if you had an Xbox or a GameCube, because for some reason PS2 got left out on this one, it seems, which is weird because I would have. Oh, I tell a lie. This came to PS2 earlier in the year. I tell a lie. Uh,
Ah,
Medal of Honor Frontline.
yes.
Okay. We're moving on to November 8th. If you had a Game Boy Advance, you could pick up The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers,
Ah, yes.
which I guess if you really wanted to play it on a handheld,
Yeah, if you had no other option, and or you wanted to play it in the car.
I guess. Also on November 8th, if you had a Game Boy Advance, you could pick up Rugrats: I Gotta Go Party, which I'm assuming is a party game.
Supposedly. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's basically just like mini games and stuff, it looks like.
Mm.
Anyway, moving on to November 9th. If you had a PS2, you could pick up a little game called ATV Off Road Fury 2.
Supposed neat? The name somewhat rings a bell, but can't quite place it.
It's one of those games where I'm like, I've seen this on store shelves a million times, but I've never played any of them.
Another one of those.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those like where like I know this franchise and I know it like there were a bunch of games, but I've never played any of them.
Hmm.
Alrighty, so that was it for the week in video games, and I'm gonna warn you, like, fucking next week's gonna be a big one too.
Supposedly understandable. I probably should not be surprised. This is kind of the year for it.
Although not all of them are gonna. It's not gonna be big ones, like, and always in a good sense. There's gonna
Yeah.
be some utter shite
Yeah.
next week too.
Yeah. That's also understandable within this industry, too.
Oh yes. Alrighty, so let's get on to the episode. Okay. Okay. Now, we start off with we find out that Fred's article on superstring theory is published in an academic journal, and she's asked to present it at a physics symposium by her old college professor, Seidel. Her presentation is interrupted when a dimensional portal opens and snake-like creatures emerge to kill her. These kind of like tentacle thingies.
Ain't that just the thing, though?
It does not happen all the time when you're presenting a physics paper.
But it's one of the risks.
It's true. You have to accept these risks when you're doing that. Angel has spied Lila during the speech, and at first thinks that she is behind it, but she is simply keeping an eye on Wesley.
Because of course she is.
Gunn and Angel suspect another member of the audience, a comic book fanatic who seemed to be expecting the portal's appearance, but it turns out he's just following stories of strangers' appearances and reading about Angel on internet forums.
I'm on the internet forums?
I love he says, "I'm in the chatty rooms." My favorite line. Fred learns that Professor Seidel is the one responsible and that he was the one who sent Fred to the Pylea dimension 6 years earlier. He felt Fred and other missing colleagues were competing for his job. Against Angel and Gunn's advice, Fred pursues vengeance against her former mentor. She asks for Wesley's help when she is almost sucked into a portal opened by a text message from Wydell. Wesley agrees to help. Meanwhile, Cordelia is staying with Connor at his vast empty loft. He trains her to slay vampires while romance blossoms, which is not creepy at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Angel Angel confronts Seidel largely to protect him from Fred's vengeance, but Seidel releases a demon from a portal to attack Angel. Seidel tries to escape, but he encounters Fred. She opens her own portal, intending to send him to a hell dimension as punishment. As he is being sucked in, Gunn arrives. When he is unable to convince Fred to close the portal, Gunn snaps Seidel's neck and throws him into the portal. Fred and Gunn lie to Angel that Seidel fell victim to his own portal meant for Fred. Connor arrives at the Hyperion Hotel to pick up Cordelia's things because they've decided to live together. Connor and Cordelia battle a common vampire. Elated when she stakes it, Cordelia impulsively kisses Connor. Connor embraces her, but Cordelia is uncomfortable and pulls away. She explains that she still doesn't know who she is or where she belongs. Connor angrily realizes that she's going back to Angel. Cordelia arrives at the hotel to talk to Angel. She tells him that she's the same person she was before her amnesia, and that person doesn't need protecting. After Angel promises not to lie to her anymore, she asks if they were in love. And that was the episode.
Yeah.
So, What do we think of this episode?
It mostly just brings to mind the old saying in our case, but the one that probably hadn't existed inside. This episode was now thinking with portals.
Always think with portals. Uh, it's it's this is a kind of like the issue with this episode. I would say is that it really, in a lot of ways, there's not a ton of um like ongoing, like there's a few things that are gonna pay off later, but a lot of this episode is very standalone.
hmm I suppose in a bit of way, it is a bit of a character building sort of piece, possibly in the way of just sort of building the world, giving a bit of explanation for how certain events kind of happened or how they want to spin the story in those sorts of cases. But yeah, it was fairly small, kind of maybe to push the story in the direction of, hey, Cordelia's back and she kind of wants to get her memory.
Yeah, yeah. There, how do I explain? There are things they're setting up in this episode, but I'm like, you probably could have done that in another episode in 5 minutes. Like this kind of is. There's a lot of standalone stuff in it.
Taking a bit more of a B plot story and making it the entire episode.
Kinda, yeah. It's still a good episode. Like it's still fun, but you know,
Indeed.
there's good stuff
Especially
in it.
since we had the appearance of a particular person within this episode.
Who are you referring to?
A gentleman who was a comic relation. Wondering if I can find the list.
Oh, the comic book
Uh,
guy.
yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
they throw in a couple of comic book references, and I'm like, okay. I mean, cool. They reference that he's Gun grabs the comic book guy and pushes him up against this like stand, and he's like, "You're crushing the dark horses," and I'm like, okay, like that's okay. Which is interesting because Dark Horse would go on to publish Angel and Buffy comics later.
you go.
They also reference Daredevil 181, which I'm sure is a reference that you did not get.
Possibly because I heard them, and it was kind of the case of they're most likely making a reference to a thing. I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, I was like, oh, that's, oh. Um, it's a Frank Miller written and drawn issue of Daredevil where, let's just say, a major character dies.
Understandable.
Yes.
But I think also with this episode, it's a bit more interesting that they're, I would sort of say, starting to kind of bring Wesley a little bit more into the fold of the group again, just with things. Though, if it's going to continue, is going to be the question, I suppose, in my mind. But it's also interesting starting to see the case of he wanted to be involved with the speech that Fred was presenting, as well as the case of Fred went to him when everyone sort of said, this isn't a good idea. And it's like, well, I ain't listening to you guys. Wesley, what are we going to do? Well, this isn't a good idea, but it's vengeance. It's like, okay.
Yeah, we see definitely that, like, we also see that, like, how do I put this? We also see Gunn commit murder in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where he snaps the professor's neck so that.
That was a thing that happened.
Yes, yes, it was.
Now he has to work with it.
Yes, and I wonder if that's going to lead to anything. Who knows? Oh. So let us talk about some international titles. Unfortunately, we only have 2 for this week. But in German, it translates as familiar enemy. Which, like, I get what they're going for, but yeah, I agree, it's not great.
Hmm.
I kind of like the French one better if I had to pick between the two. The
Hmm.
French one translates as the genius's shadow.
Hmm. Again, I see what I was going for, but I'm wondering if I'm just sort of getting it confused. Kind of the case of Fred's concern with what she kind of went through with portals, or the case of the main villain of this episode being a genius that occasionally opens up portals to swallow up his competition.
I think it's also to do with Gunn, like, realizing that, like Fred is really fucking smart, and he's kind of like, oh, like, you're a fucking genius, and I'm just kind of a regular guy. I
Hmm.
think there's also a bit of that in there. So that's kind of why I
Yeah.
like it, because it kind of works for a couple of different characters.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. Anyway,
Indeed.
if there's nothing else about this episode, we'll be next week we'll be discussing the episode "Spin the Bottle."
Because of course. Aren't we out of high school or any of those sorts of things?
um, well, I mean, I guess technically, let's see. So this is, I mean, Buffy would still be in college at this point.
And of course, they would most likely do it in college,
No,
and we
probably
would
not.
probably be about 300
I,
times stupider.
I'm just gonna say that never happened in university for me, but whatever. Uh,
Eh.
I was like, no. Anyway, this episode next week. So Lauren is going to perform a spell on Cordelia to restore her memory.
Oh boy.
Oh, it's not over yet. It inadvertently causes the gang to revert to their high school personas and leaves them with no memories of each other. Eventually, they discover that the only
Oh,
way to reverse the spell is to kill a vampire, just as Angel realizes that he is one.
oh boy.
There's going to be nonsense.
I suppose the question is it gonna be nonsense that I can tolerate, or the stuff that's just going to lead to cringe?
I don't know, but we'll find out next week. Until then, I've been Paul.
And I've been Dave.